If you are watching this video right now, there is a very high chance that in the last 24 hours you did something so ordinary, so automatic, so deeply built into your morning that you never once questioned it. And yet, a growing number of cardiologists are saying that this one habit, repeated every single morning, is quietly pushing millions of people closer to a heart attack. Not later in life, not in some distant future, but in the next few years, sometimes the next few months. Stay with me for the next few minutes because by the end of this video, you will never look at your mornings the same way again. Let me introduce you to someone. We will call him Robert. Robert was 44 years old, and if you met him, you would never think there was anything wrong with him. He wasn't overweight. He didn't smoke. He went to the gym 3 times a week, ate reasonably well, and had a stable job as a project manager at a logistics company. On paper, Robert was healthy. His blood tests from the year before looked fine. His cholesterol was borderline, but nothing alarming. He was, in every visible way, an average, healthy, middle-aged man. And that is exactly why what happened to him terrified the doctors who treated him afterward, because Robert did not fit the profile. Robert should not have ended up on a hospital bed with tubes running into his arm at 6:45 in the morning, but he did. And when his cardiologist finally sat him down weeks later and asked him to describe, in detail, minute by minute, everything he did every single morning before leaving for work, the pattern that emerged was not rare. It was not unusual. It was, in fact, almost identical to what millions of people all over the world do every single day without a second thought. Let's walk through Robert's morning together, exactly as he described it, because I want you to notice as we go how many of these details might sound familiar to you. Robert's alarm went off at 6:15 every morning. It wasn't a gentle alarm. It was loud, jarring, the kind of sound designed to yank you out of deep sleep in an instant. Robert would wake up startled, heart already pounding, and within 2 or 3 seconds, before his eyes had even fully adjusted to the light, his hand would be reaching for his phone. He would check messages, emails, sometimes the news, sometimes his work calendar for the day. All of this happened while he was still lying down, in the dark, his brain barely awake, but his nervous system already flooding with information, decisions, and small bursts of stress. A late email from his boss, a message from a client he hadn't replied to, a headline about the economy, all of this within the first 60 seconds of consciousness. Then Robert would get up, not slowly, not gradually. He would swing his legs off the bed and stand up almost immediately because he was already running a few minutes behind, as he often was, from lying flat to fully upright in under 2 seconds. He would walk straight to the bathroom, and this is where the second event of his morning took place, one so common that almost nobody thinks of it as risky at all. Robert, like many people, tended to have his bowel movement first thing in the morning, and like many people, he often strained during it, especially if he felt rushed, which he almost always did. He would sit there, tense his abdomen, hold his breath, and push, sometimes for a prolonged period, especially on mornings when his body wasn't quite ready to cooperate. After that, Robert would go straight to the kitchen. He hadn't had a single sip of water yet. His body had gone 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours without any fluid intake, and the first thing he put into it was not water, but coffee. Strong, black coffee, brewed extra concentrated because he liked what he called a real kick to start the day. He would drink it quickly, often on a completely empty stomach, sometimes finishing the first cup within minutes while simultaneously getting dressed, checking his phone again, and mentally running through his schedule for the day. Then came the shower. Robert liked his showers cold in the mornings. He had read once that cold showers were good for energy and metabolism, so he had made a habit of ending his shower, and sometimes starting it, with a sudden blast of cold water. He described the sensation as shocking myself awake. By the time Robert left his house, it was 6:55. He was rushing, slightly stressed about traffic, his stomach empty except for coffee, his body having gone through a jarring wake-up, straining, caffeine on an empty stomach, and a cold shower, all within the span of about 40 minutes. He got into his car, and it was during the drive to work, while sitting at a red light 3 blocks from his office, that Robert suddenly felt a tightness in his chest. He described it later as feeling like someone had placed a heavy book on top of his sternum. It wasn't excruciating pain. It wasn't the dramatic clutching the chest collapse you see in movies. It was a dull, pressing discomfort, accompanied by a strange shortness of breath and a wave of nausea. Robert, like so many people do, told himself it was probably just stress, or maybe indigestion from the coffee. He drove the rest of the way to work. He walked into the office. He sat down at his desk. And it was only when a coworker noticed that his face had gone pale and that he was sweating heavily despite the office being cool that anyone realized something was seriously wrong. By the time paramedics arrived, Robert was having what doctors call a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. At 44 years old, with no previous diagnosed heart disease, Robert survived. He was lucky. But his cardiologist, a woman who had been practicing for over 20 years and had seen hundreds of similar cases, told him something that stuck with him for the rest of his life. She said, "Robert, it wasn't any single thing you did this morning that caused this. It was the combination. Your body went through a perfect storm, and it happened between 6:15 and 6:45 in your own home before you even left for work." Now, I want to pause the story here, because what this cardiologist explained to Robert is something that medical researchers have known for decades, and yet almost nobody talks about it in a way that actually changes how people live. There is a reason heart attacks are so much more common in the early morning hours than at any other time of day. Multiple large-scale studies, going back over 40 years, have consistently shown that the risk of heart attack, sudden cardiac death, and stroke spikes dramatically between roughly 6 in the morning and noon, with the highest concentration of events clustering right around the time most people wake up and begin their daily routines. Doctors sometimes refer to this window as the morning surge or the witching hour for the heart. And the reason it happens has everything to do with what your body is doing internally the moment you wake up, often completely invisible to you. Here is what is happening inside you physiologically the second your alarm goes off. Your body, sensing that it is time to wake up and become active, begins releasing a flood of stress hormones. Cortisol and adrenaline surge through your bloodstream. This is a completely natural process. It is designed to prepare your body for the demands of the day, to raise your alertness, your energy, your readiness to move. But this surge also does several other things. It raises your blood pressure, sometimes sharply. It increases your heart rate. It makes your blood platelets stickier, more prone to clumping together, which is the exact mechanism that can trigger a blood clot inside a narrowed artery. It constricts your blood vessels. All of this happens naturally in every single human being, every single morning. It is not, by itself, dangerous. Your body is built to handle this surge. But here is the problem. If, on top of that natural morning surge, you add a jarring, startling wake-up that spikes adrenaline even further, if you immediately load your brain with stressful information from your phone, adding a second layer of cortisol release, if you then go from lying down to standing upright in an instant, which causes a sudden drop and then rebound in blood pressure as your cardiovascular system scrambles to keep blood flowing to your brain, a phenomenon called orthostatic stress. If you then strain forcefully during a bowel movement, which triggers something called the Valsalva maneuver, a process where holding your breath and pushing dramatically increases pressure inside your chest and abdomen, causing blood pressure to spike even higher and then crash suddenly when you release, putting real strain on your heart and blood vessels. If you then introduce caffeine into a body that is dehydrated and has an empty stomach, further increasing heart rate and blood pressure, sometimes triggering irregular heart rhythms in susceptible individuals. And if you then shock your system with cold water, causing your blood vessels to constrict rapidly and your heart rate to spike again as your body responds to what it perceives as a threat. If all of these things happen back to back, within the same 30 to 45-minute window, in a body whose arteries may already have some degree of plaque buildup, even undiagnosed, even invisible on the surface, you have created exactly the kind of perfect storm that Robert's cardiologist was describing. Each individual habit might seem harmless on its own. Millions of people drink coffee on an empty stomach and are fine. Millions of people take cold showers and are fine. Millions of people check their phones the moment they wake up and are fine. But when you stack all of these stressors on top of each other, every single morning, for years, in a body that is aging, that may have some level of arterial narrowing that hasn't been caught yet, You are repeatedly testing the absolute limits of your cardiovascular system at the exact moment it is already under its highest natural physiological stress of the entire day. This is what the cardiologists mean when they say millions of people are doing this every morning without knowing the risk. It is not one dramatic, obviously dangerous behavior. It is the invisible accumulation of small shocks to a system that is already vulnerable during those early morning hours. A system that, for most people, gives no warning signs at all until the moment it finally can't keep up. Let's go back to Robert for a moment, because his story didn't end in that hospital bed. And I think what happened next matters just as much as what happened that morning. After his heart attack, doctors performed an angiogram and discovered that Robert did, in fact, have a partially blocked artery, something that had likely been developing silently for years, completely undetected, because Robert had never had any symptoms during the day, during exercise, during stress at work. His blockage was significant enough to be dangerous, but not severe enough that it would have caused problems under normal, calm conditions. It was, according to his doctor, exactly the kind of blockage that could sit quietly for years, causing no issues, unless it was suddenly hit with a sharp spike in blood pressure and heart rate at a vulnerable moment. And that vulnerable moment, for Robert, came every single morning between 6:15 and 6:45 for years, until finally, on one particular Tuesday, his heart simply couldn't absorb the shock anymore. His cardiologist told him something else that I think is worth repeating word for word, because it reframes everything we think we know about heart attacks. She said that most people imagine a heart attack as something that happens suddenly, out of nowhere, like a bolt of lightning striking a perfectly healthy person. But in reality, for the vast majority of cases, a heart attack is the final, visible moment of a process that has been building quietly for years. And the specific instant it finally happens is very often determined not by some dramatic new development, but by a combination of ordinary, everyday stressors hitting an already compromised system at its most vulnerable time of day. In other words, the heart attack wasn't caused by that one morning. It was caused by years of silent arterial damage. But that one morning, with its stacked physiological stressors, is very often what determines the exact moment the damage finally becomes visible. This is why doctors are increasingly urging people, especially those over the age of 35, especially those with any family history of heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, or a sedentary lifestyle, to pay very close attention to how they structure the first hour of their day. Not because any single habit is a guaranteed killer, but because the first hour of your day is, physiologically speaking, the most dangerous hour your heart faces on a daily basis, and how you treat your body during that hour can either add to that danger or meaningfully reduce it. So, let's talk about what cardiologists actually recommend, because this video is not meant to simply frighten you. It is meant to give you something you can act on today, tomorrow morning, starting with your very next alarm. The first thing many cardiologists recommend is changing how you wake up. A sudden jarring alarm sends an unnecessary extra spike of adrenaline through your system, on top of your body's already elevated natural morning surge. Where possible, using a gentler alarm, or simply allowing yourself a few extra minutes to lie still after waking before reaching for your phone, gives your nervous system a chance to transition more gradually, rather than being shocked into full alertness in an instant. The second recommendation involves how you move from lying down to standing up. Sitting up slowly, pausing on the edge of the bed for even 15 to 30 seconds before standing gives your cardiovascular system time to adjust blood pressure gradually, rather than forcing a sudden shift that can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, or in more vulnerable individuals, real cardiovascular strain. This is a small change, but doctors emphasize it repeatedly because orthostatic stress is a genuinely underappreciated contributor to morning cardiac events, especially in older adults. The third recommendation is about hydration. After 6 to 8 hours without fluids, your blood is naturally more concentrated, slightly thicker, which makes it marginally more prone to clotting. Drinking a full glass of water before consuming caffeine helps rehydrate your system and can meaningfully reduce this effect. Cardiologists frequently suggest keeping a glass of water on your nightstand, specifically so that it becomes an automatic first action, before coffee, before checking your phone, before anything else. The fourth recommendation involves caffeine timing. Drinking coffee immediately upon waking, especially on a completely empty stomach, compounds the natural cortisol surge your body is already experiencing, since your cortisol levels are naturally at their peak within the first hour of waking. Many doctors now suggest waiting 30 to 60 minutes after waking before your first cup of coffee, allowing your body's natural cortisol wave to begin subsiding first, and ideally eating even a small amount of food beforehand to blunt the impact on your heart rate and blood pressure. The fifth recommendation concerns straining during bowel movements, something rarely discussed publicly, but taken extremely seriously by cardiologists, particularly for older patients or those with any known heart condition. Avoiding forceful straining, breathing normally rather than holding your breath, and not rushing this process, especially in the first 30 minutes after waking, is a specific piece of advice given to cardiac patients precisely because of how dramatically the Valsalva maneuver can spike and then crash blood pressure in a short window of time. The sixth recommendation is about temperature shock. While cold showers do have genuine benefits for circulation and alertness when done properly, doctors generally advise against sudden extreme cold water exposure immediately upon waking, particularly for anyone with any cardiovascular risk factors, since the rapid vasoconstriction this triggers adds yet another spike on top of an already elevated system. A gradual transition in water temperature, rather than an abrupt shock, is considered a much safer approach. And the seventh recommendation, one that is less physical and more mental, but no less important according to many cardiologists, is about what you allow into your mind in those first waking minutes. Immediately consuming stressful news, urgent work emails, or emotionally charged messages. The moment you open your eyes adds a psychological stress layer on top of every physical stressor we've already discussed. Giving yourself even 5 or 10 minutes of calm before engaging with the outside world, whether that means simply lying still, breathing, or gently stretching, allows your nervous system to ease into the day rather than being ambushed by it. None of these changes are dramatic. None of them require you to overhaul your entire life or spend money on some new product or supplement. They are small adjustments to the order and pace of things you are already doing every single morning. But according to the very cardiologists who see the aftermath of what happens when these small stressors stack up unchecked, these small adjustments can make a genuinely meaningful difference, especially for anyone whose heart may already be quietly carrying more risk than they realize. Robert made these changes, every single one of them. He now wakes up to a softer alarm. He sits on the edge of his bed for a full 30 seconds before standing. He drinks a full glass of water before anything else touches his lips. He waits nearly an hour before his first coffee, and he no longer drinks it on an empty stomach. He no longer rushes his bathroom routine, and his cold showers, if he has them at all, now start warm and only gradually cool down. He doesn't look at his phone until he has been awake for at least 10 minutes. He describes his mornings now as calmer, slower, and, in his words, the first time in years that I don't feel like I'm sprinting before I've even left the house. It has been a considerable amount of time since Robert's heart attack, and he is doing well. He takes medication, he attends regular checkups, and he has become, almost accidentally, an advocate among his friends and coworkers for paying attention to those first waking minutes of the day. He often tells people the same thing his cardiologist told him. Your heart doesn't ask for much. It asks for a little bit of grace in the morning, a little bit of gentleness before you throw the full weight of the day at it. I want to leave you with this thought before you go. Somewhere, right now, there is a version of Robert scrolling through videos just like you are, going about their morning exactly the way they did yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, completely unaware that the pattern they've built into their life, one small stressor stacked on another, every single morning might be quietly setting the stage for a moment they never see coming. You cannot control everything about your heart health. Genetics matter, age matters, underlying conditions matter, some of which you may not even know you have, but you can control how you treat your body in that first fragile hour after you wake up. The hour your heart is already working harder than at almost any other point in your day. You can control whether you give your nervous system a gentle transition or a series of shocks. You can control whether you hydrate before you caffeinate, whether you rise slowly instead of suddenly, whether you breathe instead of strain, whether you ease into the day instead of being ambushed by it. If this video made you think, even for a moment, about your own morning routine, I want you to actually do something about it, starting tomorrow. not next month, not after you finish some other habit you've been meaning to change. Tomorrow morning. Pick even one thing from what we talked about today, whether it's drinking water before coffee, or sitting on the edge of your bed for 30 seconds before standing, or simply not looking at your phone the second your eyes open, and commit to it. Small changes, repeated every single morning for years, are exactly what protect a heart quietly carrying risk you cannot see. And if you know someone in your life, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, who rushes through their mornings the way Robert used to, consider sharing this with them. It might be the most important 2 minutes of information you ever pass along to someone you love. Take care of your heart in these next few days, especially in those first waking minutes, because as Robert learned the hard way, it is often not the big dramatic risks in life that catch up with us, but the quiet, repeated ones we never thought to question.